Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tina Barnes, and I am an independent member and chair of the Standards Committee. I'd like to welcome you all to the Standards Committee, which is being held as an online meeting. With social distancing rules still in place, councillors are continuing to meet on this video conferencing platform instead of meeting in person at the civic offices. The Coronavirus Act 2020 has allowed local authority committees to be conducted online, attended remotely by members and officers. Public and press will be able to see and hear the meeting. The agenda papers have been published on the Council's website and the modern.gov app. These papers are considered by members. Running this meeting remotely poses a number of challenges. We need to ensure that a proper discussion takes place on the matters before us, and that where a decision is required, it is clear what has been decided and by whom. This committee rarely requires formal votes, but if necessary, I will ask members individually at the end of the debate to state if they are for, against, or wish to abstain from the recommendation before them at that stage. When it comes to simply noting a report or agreement minutes, I will instead just seek general assent. Members attending will be asked to introduce themselves. This will ensure that all are in attendance as expected and that they can hear and speak to the meeting, and also for the benefit of the public. When not speaking, all attendees should put their microphones on mute, and when called to speak, unmute your microphone and pause for about 3 seconds to allow for the slight time delay in connection. Aware that we are at the mercy of individuals' broadband services, not the least mine, it is possible that loss of connection may happen. As long as we have 3 members still in the meeting, we will be quorate. So I will start the councillors. As I say your name, could you introduce yourselves to the meeting? So I'll start with myself. I'm Tina Barnes, Chair of the Standards Committee. I'll call on other members of the committee alphabetically. Please speak slowly and clearly. Councillor Ayub.
Good evening, Chair. Councillor Mohammed Ayub, Councillor for Abbey Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Debs Edwards, Councillor at Southcote and Vice Chair of this Standards Committee.
Councillor Gittings.
Chair, it's Jenny Hazel here. He sent his apologies.
Thank you for that. Councillor Khan.
Chair, I just had a text from Councillor Khan. He's trying to log in. I don't know, he's having some problems. But he said he'll be joining the meeting.
Good. Well, we look forward to that. Councillor Lovelock.
Yes, hello, I'm Jo Lovelock. Jo Lovelock, I'm a Norfolk Ward Councillor.
Thank you. And Councillor Singh.
Yeah, hello everyone.
Councillor Singh.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm Councillor Singh from Kentwood Ward.
Thank you. Well, thank you, councillors. I'd also like to introduce you to Mike Graham, who is the Assistant Director of Legal and Democratic Services, as well as the Monitoring Officer, and he will be presenting the reports this afternoon. So may I now move to the first item of this afternoon's agenda, which is the declaration of interest. I've not been notified of any interest to be declared, but I will pause for a moment to allow any councillor to state if they have an interest and to declare the nature of the interest. So I've not received any indications, therefore we will proceed to the next item of business, the minutes, which can be found on pages 3 to 4 of your agenda papers. Do you have them to hand?
Yes, thank you, Chair, I do.
Okay. So can you confirm that the minutes are a correct record of the meeting held on the 27th of June 2019? I appreciate that only a few of us were present, but those that were present, are you able to confirm that they are a correct record?
Agree, Chair.
Yes.
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you. The minutes are approved, and well, I don't know when I'm going to be signing them in person, but we'll say in due course. So we now move on to agenda item 3, which is the investigation of complaints 2019-2020 on pages 5 to 22 of your papers. So this report provides the committee with information relating to the number, type of complaints and their disposal in the financial year 2019-20. And it asks us to consider possible amendments to the council's arrangements for dealing with future complaints against councillors. So shortly, I will ask Mike Graham to introduce the report, and after that, I will invite the councillors who indicate to speak. Now, I have a problem this afternoon in that I cannot see you in my gallery, but on the right of my screen, I have all your names. If you wish to speak, would you kindly click on the hand icon, because that shows up on my screen and will tell me who wishes to speak. I will now ask Mike Graham to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a report for you this afternoon, which is the first report in 3 parts, really. The first one is looking generally at the complaints which were received in one financial year. The second part then is a subset of that, because we're looking at one specific report which has been in the public domain and which has attracted some attention. And I've agreed with the complainant that it would be right for me to report the outcomes here to you at the Standards Committee to look at the process and the time taken in order to resolve that complaint. And then thirdly, following on from that really, is our arrangements for dealing with complaints generally, to bring to your attention some of the outstanding matters from the Committee on Standards in Public Life, and then to consider whether or not the committee wishes to make any adjustments to our present arrangements for dealing with complaints. So the matters are all interlinked in that way. And yeah, through you, Chair, if you're happy, perhaps I could pause at the end of each chunk and we could then see if councillors wish to go into any particular aspect of that element, and we can explore it before we move on.
That's
So I'll start with a sort of general report back. I understand from looking at previous minutes of your committee that you do receive around the sort of summertime each year, following the start of the new municipal year, a report back from the monitoring officer about activity in the previous year. So I've tried to bring together the complaints in the Annex A, which illustrate what the activity was in 1920, because we didn't have a committee in the summer of 2020. What I particularly wanted to do was not just to bring a number to you, but also to provide a little more detail, still anonymised, about what the complaints were broadly and where they were coming from and who they were directed to. You'll notice that what I've done is I've anonymised those complaints. If the complaint hasn't been upheld, if it's not been investigated, if it's been resolved at an early stage, then I think the public interest in the sound operation of a complaints procedure allows for those complaints to be anonymised, because there's no real benefit in pointing the finger at people who aren't really found guilty of any offence, if we should put it like that. I think it's right that publicity attracts to councillors where there has been an issue and where it's been found by, say, the Standards Committee or an investigation that there has been a breach. But otherwise, if the matter has been resolved at an early stage amicably, whether or not there's been a breach of the code or not, whether or not there's been an informal resolution, or whether or not I've disposed of it under the power that's given to me in the Constitution as monitoring officer at the initial stage, I think it's just right that I draw attention to the broad details of the issue, but not go into it in terms of identifying the parties involved. So that's why it's anonymised. What you'll be able to see from that is that we have had in that year a fairly, what I would say is low number of complaints. I think any council is always going to get some complaints. You know, councillors put themselves in the firing line in some respects when they become elected members and representatives for their area. They are making decisions which are not always popular. Frequently, when we're looking at issues like, for instance, planning, they're highly contentious locally sometimes. Councillors have to adopt a position on some of those matters of local interest, and sometimes that makes them unpopular with members of the public. And occasionally complaints come in about councillors which are more about the fact that a member of the public is aggrieved about the decision and tries to take it out on the councillor by pinpointing words that they have said, but really it's not always the case that there's been a breach of the code of conduct. So whilst we expect to get some complaints, whilst we expect that we can deal with some locally as well, I think what I'd like the committee to consider then is the point which I've made in paragraph 4.5. I think that there's a fairly low level of complaint activity, and I think that in that year it demonstrates that the councillors generally have good relations with the community. I say that in the sense that we're not looking at any particular trends, we're not looking at a large number of complaints, we're not looking about serial offenders, if we say, of people who are attracting complaints. And so I've submitted in my report that there are no systemic issues for the council to look at as a result of that 1 year's worth of activity and report back. But that's just my view, and the committee might wish to consider for itself whether or not it thinks there are things that they wish to ask me about in that complaints history. So that's the point which I've made in paragraph 4.5 of the report, purely just to offer that track record up for you to consider at this point. I'll pause there in case there are any points or comments about the general year in review.
There appear to be no comments. There appear to be no hands up.
Okay, shall I no, Councillor Edwards.
Yes, apologies. Obviously, I presumed you were going to be going on. Sorry, Chair, I've leapt in. Do apologise. The complaint by Mr. Coley against Councillor Page. Is that?
I'll go on to that next. I'll go on to that next, Councillor.
Okay, I'll come back on that then. Thank you very much for that clarification.
Would you like to continue?
I will do then. So one of the complaints is worthy of mention for two reasons which I've outlined in the report. Firstly, because there was an investigation, and because Councillor Page agreed with the recommendations and made an apology. And the second one was it was put into the public domain in any event. We had I have to say taken longer to we had taken longer to dispose of this complaint than we would like to, and it is for that reason that I did agree with the complainant that I would report the matter to the Standards Committee and allow you to scrutinise it and ask me questions about it and the progress of it if you wanted to. And I've set out in the report the basic facts of what happened, and we're not really at this instance looking about what happened in the sense that that's all been dealt with. The complainant has made his complaint. the investigator upheld part of it, but not all of it. He didn't find that there was any bullying. He did find that there was an issue of disrespect from Councillor Page towards the resident who's referred to as Mr. X in the report, because he doesn't seek or appreciate any publicity about the matter. And following that report, Councillor Page then did issue an apology. The issue is that, in fact, it took rather a long time between the complainant making his initial complaint after going to the Audit and Governance Committee in September 2019, and then in November 2020 to come back to him. So there were a sequence of events in that case, which I've set out in terms of a brief chronology about how the complaint was dealt with. And I think that's the matter where councillors might wish to consider at this point whether or not at any stage any of those reasons was unacceptable, whether or not they would expect to see any prompter action, and whether or not, when we look at our arrangements, as we're going to come on to shortly, we would want to see any indications of timescales to be included in our arrangements. I would just say a couple of points about this. It's often that they say hard cases make bad law, don't they? But this is quite an unusual case. First of all, the complainant was making a complaint not about words which were directed to him, but about words which were directed to another person, and that person didn't complain. That person and Councillor Page, the person being Mr. X referred to in the report, have had a relationship over a number of years and have exchanged words on a number of occasions. It seems then that Mr. X, although he knew he could complain, didn't wish to complain, and there was a period at the beginning of this complaint process whereby we were taking time to understand if he was going to make a complaint or not. We then went into a period of time whereby we thought that the complaint might be dealt with by the groups under stage 1 of the complaints procedure. Then, of course, we had a delay with the election. Then we had a delay with the pandemic. When the matter eventually was referred back and an investigator was appointed, the matter sort of proceeded in what I would call a more usual time frame, in the sense that an investigator was appointed and undertook their work and did the review and reported back. I have to say, in some of these cases, it is probably wise for the council to set out in its arrangements some kind of expectation about how long cases should take to be investigated. But I think if it's going to do that, I think that we have to learn lessons from complaints elsewhere. If you get a very serious complaint, if it can't be resolved immediately, but you put some effort into trying to resolve it early, so perhaps there is some discussions and negotiations. If there is the involvement of the independent person to review the complaint, and perhaps if the councillor wishes to engage with the independent person as well and discuss their position as regards the complaint, and then there is the group process, and then there is an investigation, and then there is a report back, it's highly unlikely that you're going to get away with anything by way of a process that's anything less than about 6 months. And that seems like quite a long time when you say to people, oh, you're going to make a complaint, oh, we'll deal with it in 6 months. Of course, everyone would wish to deal with it in a much quicker time frame. But when you're looking at some of the matters which are referred to in Annex A, you'll see that when people make complaints, and we've been able in a large number of those to be able to say, well, we've come to some sort of local resolution, or we've been able to go back to them to say, well, I'm sorry, but the code just isn't applicable here. Those are disposed of quite quickly. So we're not talking about the majority of cases where we're talking about an elongated timescale. We really are talking about a minority of cases, which are the more difficult cases, where there is an elongated timescale because of the involvement of a number of different parties, and because there isn't an acceptance, possibly, of what the facts of the case are. because in those some difficult cases, what usually happens is the counsellor says, well, I didn't say that, I didn't mean that, or everybody knows what the context was, or the person making the complaint has got an axe to grind or whatever. So if you haven't got an agreed factual background to the case and it has to go forward for investigation, then inevitably it is going to take more time. Now, I think in this case, even if we'd said we wanted to dispose of it in about 6 months, we still haven't hit that kind of a target because we've taken 14 months. So I think it's right for us to bring it here and see if there's any lessons to be learned. I suppose that my advice to the council would be to think about, in general, how we frame our arrangements to complainants in a user-friendly document. And this is going slightly into the next part of what I want to talk about, to say, we will get back to you promptly when you make a complaint. If there is a complaint, we will refer it promptly to the group process, and we will probably try and give, I would ask the committee to consider some timescales around the different stages, which would be managing expectations around how long it might take if we do that kind of a process. So if we are looking about a referral into a group process, I don't think we're looking at anything less than about a month, and it might be about a month to 2 months by the time that is actually dealt with, depending on what the group process is. And if we're talking about something which is referred to an independent investigator, even an easy case might take 3 months, and it might take up to 6 months. And I think we should possibly try and think about reflecting that back to complainants in our arrangements when we're advertising them. But I'll pause there for councillors to come back on that particular case about Mr. Colley and ask any questions they wish to ask me.
Councillor Edwards.
Oh, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Graham, for your clarity on what we have to look at today, and I think changes do have to be made. I am concerned because this particular incident was resolved quite speedily. I am concerned we have a third party making a complaint, and I find that does not fit with the standard committee, our processes, or anything. We don't know the underground or behind of what this gentleman wishes to complain about. He has obviously outlined it vaguely in the papers you provided. I am worried these complaints need to be addressed quickly, promptly, sorted, and handshaken, shall we say, and mistakes agreed, and let's move on, and I apologise, or there is no complaint. If we have these third-party complaints, we will be going on forever and ever, looking at why this happened. I feel that although the gentleman who complained against Councillor Page, is it Mr. Coley, that it was I won't say it's unnecessary. He's brought up a really good point, but I do think that we need to look at our policies and say that this can't happen. If the two parties have agreed, have passed it over, a third party making a complaint doesn't hang. For me, it doesn't hang. I don't know how other councillors think about it, because these situations can go on forever and it's not helping anybody. I do believe that you're very right to putting a timescale, a tight timescale on any sort of complaint. We need to have this because it means resolution. People take it seriously. Resolution is made, and we can move on and learn by that. And I think that's a really good point. I am pleased to see that timescales need to be tightened. It was very difficult over the last couple of years, as you know, with the pandemic. So going back to what I said before, a third party making a complaint about something that's already resolved, that the initial hurt party did not wish to make a complaint, to me, it's not a complaint. It's somebody trying to stir things up.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Can I bring in Councillor Lovelock? Councillor Lovelock?
Yes, I'm just clicking the buttons. Thank you. I mean, I think I was surprised that this was still dragging on, I have to say, because it'd been talked about for such a long time. And obviously, I understand that the matter was resolved after discussion with Councillor Page and Mr. Graham, and he have had conversations since. So I don't quite know why we're still having to talk about it, given it's been around for such a long time. And the last year's been very difficult, clearly, in terms of processes anyway. We've all been learning how to do it all online, and there were all sorts of issues like the general election and then the start of the pandemic, which got in the way. Nevertheless, I do think that we should aim to resolve any complaints as quickly as possible for everybody's sake. The fact that the person that Councillor Page had an exchange of views with at a meeting did not wish to complain does seem slightly odd to me, that somebody else would make a complaint on his behalf. And, you know, it's difficult, isn't it, when you know some of the history of other complaints that have been around through the years, not to come to the same conclusion as Councillor Edwards, that there was an axe to grind somewhere. However, Councillor Page has accepted he shouldn't have said what he said. He's apologised, and I think we should all move on from that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lovelock. Is there anyone else who wishes to make a comment? Right. In that
Sorry, Chair. I was trying to put. Sorry, Chair. I was trying to put the hand up, but I don't know if I got through or not.
Oh, this is Councillor Singh.
Councillor, you.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor. No. No.
Yeah.
I can't see your hand, but please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd just like to add that I think on future complaints and all, I think we need to put a time frame on it and not to let it drag too long, which I am agreement with my Councillor Edwards and Councillor Lovelock. And also, I think generally what has happened regarding Councillor Page, I mean, sometime the person he was making reference to, you know, within meetings, councillors kind of have that accept them to bit of a, I would say, a cross chat, and I think they understand, and it's not appointed personally, but if it was, and Councillor Page has apologized as well, so I think that should be close of the matter. I think that should be resolved. That's my view on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ayub. Before passing back to Mike for his comments on all of your comments, I just want to confirm that to see if Councillor Singh wishes to add anything. Councillor Singh. Councillor Singh. Right. Now I'm not getting anything from Councillor Singh. So can I pass the form back to Mike Graham?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you for Councillor's comments on that. I think if the complainant was here, he would probably say that there was a public interest in him making the complaint, evidenced by the fact that after an investigation, a breach was found, and Councillor Page accepted that and made the apology in accordance with the report. So I think in terms of going forward, councillors have hit upon a good point, which I think needs to be extrapolated in our arrangements for how we deal with complaints, which we're probably silent on at the minute. So I think we need to sort of tackle it head on. But ordinarily, if words are directed to a person, it would be that person who is expected to be the person who complains. unless there's some other exceptional circumstances. I think we've always got to allow for some kind of exceptional circumstances or some kind of overriding public interest. I'm just thinking about the hoo-ha which has developed in the last couple of days as a result of that interview with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, whereby the television presenter Piers Morgan was effectively relieved of his duties on morning television because of comments which he made. The outrage came from members of the public, but of course there was no outrage from the people themselves who were subject to the comments, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. And we can't sort of rule out the possibility that at some point in the future, members of the public may well be offended in numbers about what something a councillor says, but the person themselves to whom the words are directed don't actually make any kind of response or complaint. In those circumstances, I think we have to allow ourselves a bit of wiggle room to say, well, we will take a complaint in those circumstances. Now, what that looks like and what the rules should be, I think we just have to expand a little bit in our arrangements to say, this is our ordinary expectation, and this is what we think, this is where we think we might depart from that in the public interest. And so if councillors are happy, and Chair, if you're happy, what I would propose is that if councillors accept the recommendations which are in the report tonight for me to bring back a revised set of arrangements, then I try and bring that point into the new arrangements so we explain quite clearly what our expectations are in different circumstances. And then as part and parcel of those arrangements, I can also put in some expectations around timescales and how complaints will be dealt with.
Thank you. Does anybody have any further remarks that they want to make? Right. So I see Councillor Lovelock. Go ahead, Councillor Lovelock.
Sorry, that was an accidental press. I was trying to find a different button. Sorry about that. So easy.
So easy to do. Okay, so as there are no further comments to receive, then I would like to ask you now to note the report and agree the changes or the recommendations which have been put forward.
Chair, may I just intercede and say, ask if I should go on to the third part of that report and deal with the Committee on Standards in Public Life matters?
Right. Yes, of course. Do you not want me to get the agreement for the recommendations for this part of the meeting?
It's up to you, Chair. I just wanted to check that we hadn't overlooked that fact that I've got the other part to deal with.
Oh no, absolutely not. No,
I apologize.
I just thought we would take this part first and finalise it. So can we agree with the recommendations which have been put forward and ask Mike to produce a revised set of arrangements for dealing with complaints for presentation at our next meeting, date to be agreed?
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards.
Agreed.
Councillor Lovelock.
Agreed.
Thank you, Councillor Ayub.
Agreed, Chair.
And Councillor Singh.
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, so we now can proceed to agenda item 4, the Code of Conduct, on pages 23 to 58 of your papers. Now, I am looking at the time. I believe, Councillor Lovelock, you have another meeting to attend at 5:30?
Sorry. Yes, it would be helpful to be finished by 5:30, as I've got 2 more meetings following on, one after the other. So yeah, please. And I've had meetings all afternoon as well. So 5 minutes to get the water and other things. Yes, thank you.
Okay, so I think I would ask people to very kindly bear the time restriction that we have on us and to be as concise as you can. This report outlines the new recommended code of conduct published by the Local Government Association, and we're being asked to review the new model code with a view to adopting it in its entirety or with revisions. So I'd now like to ask Mike to introduce the report for us, please. And I believe that you're going to do this taking each of the provisions one by one as appropriate. So over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I put out in the report some specific issues for consideration, and I think that that's possibly where we should devote our attention. Unless councillors have a different view, my overall consideration about the code is it's a very welcome publication. It's been consulted upon widely. Some thought has been given to it in terms of the failings of the old models, and without trying to be too prescriptive, produce a new model which includes some guidance about how to behave in different circumstances, and it also tackles some issues which have been left out of the previous code. So overall, it is a welcome addition. There are some things which I think we should have a look at, and that's why I've set those out in the report. So I think what I'd direct your attention to first, if we're short on time, is to look at first of all at the gifts and hospitality threshold. This is dealt with at 3.15 in the report. The model code talks about a threshold of £50. My feeling is that that's rather on the high side, and I'd like members to consider that. The new the relevant level that we've got in our current code is 25. I think what members need to think about in this circumstance is we're talking here about the guideline for accepting gifts and hospitality. If our broad policy is not to accept gifts and hospitality, we're really talking about those occasions where turning down gifts and hospitality would give rise to offence. And we wouldn't want to encourage a culture of gifts being routine or expected or part and parcel. We're talking here about the circumstances in which perhaps grateful ward residents or organisations in the community might express their thanks to councillors with some sort of token, which we would then expect that it would be rude to turn down, and a nominal value of a gift could be accepted. So if one thinks about the sort of things we're talking about, a bottle of wine, a bunch of flowers, a box of chocolates, something of that nature, it's difficult to envisage getting up to £50 worth in terms of that guideline. And I think what I'd ask members to consider is whether or not they're happy with 25, whether or not they want to allow a little extra for inflation if this hasn't been considered for a while, and whether or not they think they would stretch as far as the £50 that's recommended in the model code.
Thank you. Would you like to take comments on that now? And we'll start with Councillor Lovelock.
I'm coming. Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much, Chair. I mean, down the years, I'm trying to think. I've had the odd box of chocolates, the odd bunch of flowers, whatever, usually from a grateful constituent, which I always politely say it's really not necessary, but thank you very much, because I think you do offend them if you return it. I think that would be worse. But I've always erred on the side of reporting everything, because, you know, I don't know for certain how much a particular box of chocolates is worth or how much a bunch of flowers has cost somebody. So I've always just erred on the side of registering it as a gift, particularly if it's someone who's around issues like planning. I think we have to be particularly careful there that we're not seen to be being influenced by being given gifts, because that sort of rumour has persisted down the years, hasn't it? So I would always urge colleagues to just drop a note to members' services to make a note in the book. And I don't think putting a value on it is necessarily helpful.
Thank you, Councillor Lovelock. Councillor Edwards.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I think there has to be a limit, and it's really the £25. I know Councillor Lovelock doesn't feel that a monetary value is there, but it does count towards something. So you can say it's nice, you get a bunch of flowers. I've had a plant, or thank you very much, and a bottle of wine, or just been extremely kind. And I think that they've been very kind to me, rather. I've been kind to them, so you can't put a value on somebody being kind to you. So I do think we should stick with the £25 threshold. You can get a very nice bunch of flowers from Marks and Spencer's for under £25. I know that. I send it to my mother. But that I don't think £50 is too much. £50 is just too much.
Thank you. Are there any other comments from any other members of the committee? Okay. I pass it back now to Mike.
Thank you, Chair. I think the other point which I would say to councillors is more important to consider in the new model code is the rule and the guidance around exempt information, which I've set out in the report at paragraphs 317 onwards. If I just take you in the agenda pack to where I'm talking about, we're looking here at, if I can just find it, paragraph 4, confidentiality and access to information. And if you look at paragraph 4 in your pack, which is on page 34 on the modern.gov pack, if councillors have got that to hand, it talks about, as the general rule, quite a complicated set of provisos. And I think that this is in contrast with everything else in the model code. Everything else in the model code is really straightforward, plain English, and easy to understand what the rule is. As here, in this rule, as a councillor, 4.1, I do not disclose information, and then we have got 1, 2, 3 other levels at which that rule is then caveated depending on the circumstances. So we've actually got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 things to take into account about disclosure of information. My feeling is, and having been through that paragraph with the lead councillor, that is an unreasonable request for councillors to take that into account and just to adopt that. What I would be tempted to advise is that where councillors wish to disclose information which has come to them in circumstances of being confidential or exempt information, or where they've got reason to believe that it's confidential or it's exempt information, or they can reasonably guess that it has got that nature to it, I think the general obligation should just be to take advice from the monitoring officer. Because I think otherwise what's going to happen is that if councillors try and navigate those 12 provisos on 3 different levels by themselves, the chances are they're going to come unstuck. And what I would rather do is just accept that all councillors can take advice from the monitoring officer. It's entirely confidential, it goes nowhere. They can pick my brains about what they want to do and why they want to do it. I'll give them some clear advice. It'll be followed up in writing if necessary, and they will have that, and they'll know which way to go after that. And then if they decide to go with my advice or disregard it, it'll be clear that they've had the advice and what the advice is. And I think that this part of the code could really be simplified for all councillors. Councillor Page, you're on. You're live on the microphone.
Oh, my apologies.
Are you ready for comments
Certainly.
from the councillors? Mike?
Certainly, yes.
Okay, so who would like to speak? So we start with Councillor Edwards.
Thank you very much, Chair. I quite agree with the suggestion from Mr. Graham that we just have you consult the monitoring officer and everything, because we do that not only to protect ourselves but to protect the people we're representing. And I think that's the fair thing. And and the monitoring officer will have the expertise, legal advice, and the support. Thank you.
Would anybody else like to speak, or is there general agreement with?
Agree with that.
Councillor?
Agree with that, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, so back to you, Mike.
Well then, Chair, if members are happy with those two sort of knotty problems dealt with, what I would propose to do is to present a revised code of conduct for the committee to consider as a final draft, and then we can look at it in its final form before we recommend it to council for approval. I've also put some other matters into the report, which I don't think are as important. If members wish to ask me anything about those now, I'm very happy to discuss them, but bearing in mind the time that you've indicated, I'm more than happy to take the guidance on those two main points, go away, draft a code and present it back to you.
Thank you. Is there anything further, do you think, that you would like to raise with Mike? Okay, in that case then can we agree with the adoption of the model code of conduct with any revisions put forward? Are we able to agree on that?
Quite happy to agree when it returns back to the Standards Committee.
Right. Any other thoughts on that from anyone? Okay. So is that what needs to happen now, Mike? That you will put together?
Yeah.
You put together a paper and present it at another meeting, and when people will decide whether they wish to accept that.
I think yes, I will present it at another meeting. I did put into 2.1 that we'd recommended to council, but given that we haven't got the time to go through each one point by point and councillors can satisfy themselves on each individual point, I think I'll take the guidance that you've offered me this afternoon, go away, present it back to you, and we'll consider it. We'll take it at a further meeting before we recommend it to council. So I think that's the safest thing to do. And I think at the same time, what we can do is have a look at the new arrangements, which I'm proposing as well. And then you can have those side by side and see if you're happy. That provides a good overall framework for the standards in the council to move forward.
Thank you. And just one other item to consider, and that is, can we agree that a training programme for the code, when it is adopted, is developed and presented by Mike after the council elections in May 2021? Not sure we can do that, can we, if we don't have a meeting of standards before that?
I'll be training councillors on the code anyway, so we'll mention the new code within that context.
Okay, that's fine. Is there any other business? Does anyone want to raise any other matters in this regard? And in that case, yes, Councillor Edwards.
I said no, thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Lovely to see your face after all this time. Oh, got a laugh from you.
Thank you for that. Okay, so thank you very much for your attendance and participation in the meeting. And that concludes this afternoon's business.
Thank you.
Chair, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Keep safe. Take care.
Thank